thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you all for joining the session. And I admit I have never given a talk in this format, so this will be a first for me. And this is awfully generous of you guys to join us in this format. So today is Constitution Day. And it is the intersection of my two areas of my research expertise, which is US constitutional law and US immigration law and policy. So why don't we get started? Here's what I wanted to do today. I wanted to spend some time talking about what's different about President Trump in terms of immigration and in terms of broader comparison to other US presidents. I wanted to spend some, Trump has completely overhauled the US immigration system. And because we have limited time, I only have time today to discuss two of them. I want to focus on his wall and also gutting of the asylum system. And obviously during Q&A, if you have other questions about other aspects of immigration policy, please feel free to raise them. Since I should be able to comment and answer questions on any of them. And finally, I wanted to end the talk about components of what everyone agrees, Democratic, Republican, liberal, and conservative, that the US immigration policy is broken. And what we disagree on is how to fix it. But we can end with what I think are components necessary to real reform. So how is the Trump presidency different? The scholars of political science who study the presidency call the modern presidency everyone from Franklin Delano Roosevelt forward. And the reason why that's the demarcation for the modern presidency is that the institution gains a lot more power under FDR, and it's a lot more of a robust institution. So in the modern era of the presidency, there has been no other president who has run on an anti-immigration platform, but that defines Trump. That was his signature issue when he ran for president. And sure enough, he has followed through with it in his first term. The other thing that differentiates this president from other presidents, both Democratic and Republican, is the frequency and the volume of the lies. And all politicians lie, but it is the volume and frequency of the lies that we'll talk about in a minute. And this president, unfortunately, disregards the rule of law. The fact that BYU has a Constitution Day event leads me to believe that you respect the rule of law. And we will talk about what aspects of the rule of law. And finally, Trump is very unusual in that he has completely overhauled the US immigration system, but he has not done it in conjunction with Congress, and he has not done it by passing legislation. Instead, it has been unilaterally achieved by over 400 technical rule changes. So basically, the Congress has not weighed in on many of these rule changes due to the nature of how the changes were made. The federal courts have weighed in on a lot of his decisions, and a lot of his decisions have been invalidated by the federal courts, but not all of them. So this was JFK's book called The Nation of Immigrants, and as you can imagine, it's a book about the contribution of immigrants to the United States and the legacy of the United States as a nation built by immigrants. And so if you think of JFK as the pro-immigrant president, Trump is probably the polar opposite. So a lot of news organizations and journalists have been fact-checking Trump. And this is the Washington Post, and this is from, this is not even current, this is from July 9, 2020. The Washington Post has a fact checker on Trump, and since he has been in office, there have been 20,055 false or misleading claims made by the president. That's in total, not on the subject of immigration alone. And the reason why I'm showing you this chart is because on the subject of immigration, this is the number and volume of lies. And so perhaps since this president is so free with his falsehoods, that we should take with not with a grain of salt, but maybe with a bag of salt, what he says about immigration. What's interesting about this Washington Post chart is that you can see when the lies ramp up, the number of lies. And it's around the midterm elections, and it was around the Mueller report. So this is Washington Post is not the only organization fact-checking Trump. Daniel Dale, who's the Washington bureau chief of the Toronto Star, he has attended every Trump rally. He has frequently been on TV fact-checking the president, and he calls the president a fire hose of lies. So the rule of law, which is supposed to be anchored by the US Constitution. This is a famous quote, probably familiar to many of you, by John Adams. We are a government of laws, not of men. It sounds so simple, and it sounds like it's a great thing, but what does it actually mean, the rule of law? So this is, we got some help from the American Bar Foundation, and they have a 4-point list of what constitutes the rule of law. And the most fundamental thing is that all persons are accountable under law, that even the president of the United States is bound by law. And the second point is that the laws are stable, they're publicized, and they're broadly understood by the people who have to follow them. The third point is that there's a fair, robust, and accessible legal process where rights and responsibilities are evenly enforced on everyone, not on the red states, not on the blue states, not on poor people, not on white people, but on everyone. And finally, the rule of law requires a diverse, competent, and independent core of lawyers and judges. So these principles are not unfamiliar to all of us. And these principles, it bears repeating, these are not democratic principles. These are not Republican principles. These are not liberal or conservative. Respect for the rule of law should be fundamental in any democracy. So this is the lack of rule of law under the Trump administration thus far. This is a partial list. President Trump has encouraged the rough treatment of peaceful protesters by the police. He's said it multiple times in rallies. Even though peaceful protest, whether it's Black Lives Matter or for any political cause, is protected by the First Amendment. And it's protected multiple ways under the First Amendment, through the freedom of speech, through the freedom of assembly, for the freedom to petition the government to address grievances. President Trump, unlike other presidents, including Richard Nixon, who really hated the press, Nixon had never called the press, also protected by the First Amendment, the enemy of the people. No American president has called the press the enemy of the people multiple times. They might think it, they might be unhappy with the press, but no American president uses those words to describe the press, except other authoritarian leaders, like Duterte in the Philippines, like Bolsonaro in Brazil, and like Putin in Russia. And we just looked at the description of what is the rule of law, which comes down to everyone is treated equally under the law. But in the Trump administration, there are two systems of justice. If you are a friend of President Trump, so if you're Michael Flynn, if you're Roger Stone, and even after you've been convicted, and for Flynn, he's pled guilty in front of two federal judges, and both of them were in prison, and Trump pardoned them and commuted their sentence. So there seems to be a system of justice for Trump's friends, and then a system for the rest of us. The Muslim travel ban that was instituted a few years ago is a severe test of the Constitution's protection of religious freedom and of the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. And parts of the ban were struck down by the Supreme Court, but parts of it were upheld. And early in Trump's term, there was a case before a federal district court judge named Gonzalo Curiel. And the case was about Trump University. And basically the judge ruled that the university was fraudulent and that the university had to pay back the people that they had defrauded. So Trump was not very mad. Welcome to the ambiance of the Brooklyn street corner. Trump was not very happy with Judge Curiel's ruling. And so he goes on Twitter and he attacks the judge in very personal and racist terms. He said that the judge was biased against him because he's Mexican. Actually, Judge Curiel is born in Indiana and born and raised, so he is a US citizen of Mexican descent. But this is a violation of the separation of powers. There's the federal courts that are designated under Article 3 of the US Constitution that's supposed to check the other two branches. And with Trump's tweets against Judge Curiel had to, they had to provide, the federal courts had to provide security because he got death threats after that. So these are instances of, unfortunately, our president not respecting the rule of law. So let me talk first about one of Trump's signature proposals. And in his words, he calls it the big, beautiful wall that he wants to build on our southwestern border. Now, this is Constitution Day, so the first question we should ask is the wall constitutional? And there is nothing in the US Constitution that says he cannot build the wall. I mean, sure, Congress has to appropriate the funds for it because they hold the power of taxation, but there's nothing unconstitutional about Trump building a wall. I would submit, however, that a question about constitutionalism should be the start, not the end of our discussion about the wall. And I want to go through several aspects of why I don't support the wall, why I think that even people who are concerned with undocumented immigration, I don't think you should support the wall either, because I don't think the wall does what it purports to do. So we know from many studies that 40% of the undocumented population currently residing in the United States did not come across the southwestern border. They came legally through a temporary visa, meaning they flew into JFK International Airport in my state. They flew into an international airport in your state. They had a temporary visa, which then expired, and then they didn't go home. So building a wall, if you're trying to address undocumented immigration, is not really tackling the entire problem. So I'm in New York City, and last week we had our 9th annual commemoration of the 9/11 terror attack. All the hijackers that attacked during the Twin Towers, they came and arrived in the US, they entered the US on temporary visas that were not, and they didn't cross the southwestern border. So if you're concerned about national security, that southwestern border is not the way to guard the country, because that's not how the 9/11 hijackers came in. The migration flows to our southwestern border have changed dramatically. In recent years, in the last 5 to 6 years, it used to be, before the last 5 to 6 years, it was mainly single Mexican men that were trying to come to the US, evade Border Patrol, and to work, to send money to their families because they could make so much higher salaries here. That's not the primary flow of people coming to the southwestern border anymore. Now we have unaccompanied minors. We have children as young as 7 with smugglers. We have families with small children, and we have a lot of women that are by themselves. These are not people trying to work in the US. These are not people trying to evade Border Patrol to get into the country to sneak in. They want to find a Border Patrol agent and turn themselves in because they're requesting asylum from our country. So building a wall is not deterring people who are desperate and who are fleeing gang violence, who are fleeing drug violence in Central America. Building a wall is not going to prevent them from coming because their whole purpose is to get to the US border to claim asylum or to apply for asylum. Um, there have been over 200 tunnels that have been dug under the southwestern border, and I'm gonna show you a story about one in a few minutes. Building a wall is not really guarding against these tunnels that go under the wall. So, so the wall is of limited effect. So I'm sure we have somebody who's had a class in economics. And here I want to introduce the idea of opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is, first of all, the estimates for the southwest border wall are between 15 to $25 billion. And I like to put in all the zeros so we can see exactly how much money we're talking about, our money, US taxpayer money. Opportunity cost is this. What else could we spend that money on? My goodness, how many vaccines could we pay for? How much PPE could we buy for medical personnel? How many interstate highways can we shore up? How much could we spend on education? If we spend 15 to $25 billion on a wall that doesn't even work, what else are we taking that money from? And you know, I want to close this discussion of the wall with this. We started the discussion about the wall about a question of constitutionality. And the question of constitutionality is a very simple and technical one. It is a federal judge or typically a federal judge holding up the US Constitution and comparing it to a government action, and in this case is Trump building the wall. And if the action or the federal or state or local law conflicts with the Constitution, then it's null and voided. So we started with that discussion, and we said that it's not unconstitutional to build the wall. But we have other values that we as a country and as a society hold dear besides just technical constitutionality. And one of them is the great devastation that the building of the wall has caused on the southwestern border. Because of the building of the wall, we have desecrated multiple historical burial grounds of Native Americans and of historic burial grounds of enslaved people. And there's an internationally renowned butterfly refuge on the southwestern border in Texas. And the Butterfly Refuge filed a lawsuit to stop the wall because they were pointing out the tremendous environmental damage to that region and to the butterfly's survival. And their case was thrown out by a federal judge. And I didn't put it on the slide, but many private landowners in Texas along the border are not in favor of the wall because it's putting a wall on their private property. Imagine you've owned your ranch for 5 generations in your family, and all of a sudden the federal government wants to build a wall right through it. So there are many drawbacks to the wall, and the primary one is it simply doesn't work to deter undocumented immigration. So Trump repeatedly has hit the point that We have to build the wall because it's about the security of our country, because dangerous people are coming in. And he called Mexicans drug dealers and rapists while he was running for president. And it turns out that this is the Anti-Defamation League. And this is an organization that is dedicated to guarding the reputation of Jewish people against defamation. And they track extremist hate crimes. This is their 2019 report, which is the same result as the 2018 report. And they said that if you're worried about murders and carried out by extremists, the extremists we must be most concerned about are white supremacists that are domestic. They are not people from foreign countries. They on the whole, they are white supremacists that are born and raised and based in the United States. These findings are echoed by the Department of Homeland Security. And the Department of Homeland Security in the last year has found the same result, that the greatest threat to our national security is internal. It's inside the United States, and it's posed by white supremacist groups. And we're hearing that Trump officials tried to bury that DHS report. So that's the actual threat to the country. Oh, this was great fun when I found this article January 29th. So they found the longest southwestern border smuggling tunnel. And this tunnel was over 4,000 feet in length. And impressively, it was 70 feet underground. It's also extremely sophisticated. There's a railway system where you have little carts. There's an elevator, and there's air conditioning and air ducts. And so you're wondering, what are these tunnels for? They're usually for the smuggling of drugs. And they're also used for the smuggling of people. So a tunnel that's 70 feet underground, the wall is not going to address that. Finally, Trump wants to dissuade people from coming to our southwest border, whether to dissuade them from crossing without documents, or to dissuade them from even applying for asylum. And despite the very poor treatment of immigrants, that immigrants, they know, they read the newspapers too. And despite all of that bad treatment and the stories about family separations, people are still coming. And so the wall is not a deterrent, and neither are the harsh immigration policies. And the reason is because there's an economic slump in Mexico, and because Trump's remain in Mexico policy is actually encouraging now, again, single Mexican men to try to cross the border, in addition to the Central American families that continue to try to apply for asylum. So let's talk about the second big Trump policy, which is asylum. So political asylum is guaranteed the right to apply for asylum. Doesn't mean you'll get it, but you have a right to apply for it. That's guaranteed by domestic law and by international law. The asylum system arose out of World War II. It arose out of the international horror at the Holocaust, that people around the world were saying, how could this have happened? How could so many Jews be turned away from all these countries only to be slaughtered in Germany? Let's not let this happen again. So there were multiple international agreements that were signed, and with the purpose of not returning people to prosecution and to harm. And so the United States is signatory to many of those agreements. And by us gutting the asylum system, not by us, but by the Trump administration, this is a violation of our international commitments. Gutting the asylum system, as I said a minute ago, is not deterring people from coming. Because if your house is on fire and if drug gangs and drug dealers are threatening the safety of your family, you don't care. If you have to be incarcerated upon arrival in the US, you're still gonna go. And so it doesn't, his asylum policy in the wall neither addresses the factors that push people to leave their countries. And without addressing that factor, any physical barrier and any cruelty or taking away of the asylum system simply will not slow people down, and people will continue to come. So it has zero deterrent effect. It is a shameful abdication of US international leadership. The United States used to be the country that took in the most refugees. And here, you know, I suppose I could stop here and make you an impassioned argument about why we should accept refugees, that why, you know, we took in somebody like Albert Einstein and he turned out to be brilliant and with all these scientific discoveries. I don't want to make that argument today to you. I want to argue instead that we should preserve our asylum system, which does not guarantee everyone asylum, but allows them to apply for asylum and to allow them to have a process to determine whether they meet asylum under US law, because they're humans and because they're fellow humans, not because they may become an amazing and outstanding immigrant, but because they are fellow human beings and because we should respect human rights. So how has Trump attacked our asylum system? This is probably one of the hardest parts for me because I'm currently in the middle of another project that studies how asylum is granted to women who are fleeing based on persecution based on their sex. And so what Trump has done is that he's trying to deter people from applying by separating their families when they arrive in the United States. They take their kids away, put the kids somewhere else. That policy was deliberate. I don't care how many times Kristen Nielsen and the Trump officials say that there was no official policy. There's memos that they did intend to separate families from their children. That policy was invalidated by federal courts, but the US still has at least 70 something children that they cannot find the parents for because they deported the parents without the child. And because, you know, if you or I get sent to jail because we were arrested during a protest or something, and they take your wallet, they give you a receipt, don't they? The court gives you a receipt, or the police gives you a receipt. Customs and Border Patrol took people's children and didn't keep track of whose kid was whose. And so now there's a group of children and we don't know who they belong to and where their parents are. There's a credible fear. Okay, so if you're intending to apply for asylum, you come to the US border and you meet with a Border Patrol agent. You're supposed to be given what's called a credible fear interview. Those initial interviews are supposed to be conducted by asylum officers. And asylum corps officers are a group of people trained in human rights law, in international law, and most importantly, they're trained in non-adversarial interview techniques. Customs and Border Patrol agents are trained to enforce the border. They have not received the same training. So Trump has decided that Customs and Border Patrol will now do these credible fear interviews. This is a confusion of function. Customs and Border Patrol agents are trained to keep people out, not to let people in. And not surprisingly, the percentage of people failing the credible fear interview and turned right around has gone much higher. So another part of Trump's policy to discourage people from applying for asylum is he instituted a remain in Mexico policy. Previously, if you applied for asylum, we let you into the United States. You could not work legally. You cannot get a work visa, but you could remain in the US until your court date in front of an immigration judge. Trump signed an agreement. He pressured Mexico into signing an agreement with us that people who apply for asylum now have to wait in Mexico for their court date. This court date could be over a year away. So now there's a population of 60,000 people along the US-Mexico border in these tent cities. It is violent. News organizations and researchers on the ground have documented multiple and frequent burglaries, beatings, rapes, because this is a lawless area. And these are very vulnerable people. And gangs and drug cartels have gotten involved. So it's a lot of misery along the border. There are at least 20,000 people outside of Mexico, in Mexico, waiting for their court date in the United States that have been there for over a year under this Trump policy of remaining in Mexico. Trump's immigration person, Stephen Miller, he's very good at not letting a pandemic go to waste. Based on the pandemic as justification, he has instructed Customs and Border Patrol to turn away 20,000 people, to not even let them submit an application for asylum. And the ostensible justification is they're afraid that the people have COVID. Never mind that the country with the highest COVID infection rate is the United States, not Mexico and not Central America. But included in that group that are turned away are 8,800 unaccompanied minors. And think of who would be so desperate to send their kid by themselves, 7, 8 years old, 13 years old, with a smuggler, unless you really thought that that was preferable to having them remain in El Salvador and killed by the gangs. So Trump, there's technically an asylum system in place, but it's a lot of people have not set foot in the US, and there are miserable conditions. And the point is they're trying to discourage asylum applications, and it's not doing the job. There's still people showing up to apply. So this is what Trump thinks about asylum seekers and anyone who wishes to have the nerve to show up at the southwestern border. And this is from June 2018. He has not changed his views on this. He thinks that without judges and courts, that we should turn people around and send them back to whence they came. And he calls this law and order. This is not law and order. This is not the rule of law. This is quite the opposite of it. He doesn't think they should get any due process at all. So, but the problem for him is that US immigration law and international law, and to show up at a US border without proper immigration documents is not automatically a crime. If you're gonna show up at a border without proper documents in order to apply for asylum, it is a right that is protected by domestic and international law. Theoretically, you are supposed to have a hearing before an administrative judge, before an immigration judge. And if the immigration judge doesn't grant you a right to stay, you can appeal the IJ's decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. The BIA is the Supreme Court of Immigration. They're an administrative body. And if, say, the BIA tells you, sorry, you have to go, you can still appeal to the federal courts and theoretically up till the Supreme Court. I say theoretically here because to go to an administrative court judge, immigration judge, to claim asylum, to plead for asylum, and to beg them not to deport you, this is under the administrative law system, which is separate from the criminal law system. Under the criminal law system, you are guaranteed a right to counsel at public expense. But since this is an administrative procedure, even though the results could mean life or death, that you're sending somebody back to face persecution or possibly death. Even though the stakes are high, you have no right to counsel at public expense in an immigration proceeding. So we have these ridiculous cases of immigration judges trying to get 6-year-olds to say something about why they deserve asylum. And a lot of you guys are homeschooling your kids. I think you know how realistic or unrealistic it is to try to ask a squirmy 6-year-old to articulate within the bounds of US immigration law why they deserve asylum. And so these children are put through these hearings and without counsel at public expense. If they're lucky, they have relatives in the US who will pay for lawyers to represent them. Or if they're really, really lucky, they may have one of the non-government groups that represent them pro bono. But those groups right now are so overworked and they're swamped. Okay, so how is Trump's immigration policy different from Obama? By the way, I'm not a big fan of Obama's immigration policy either. And his critics, including me, and I've said it in print, that his critics called Obama the deporter in chief. And that's because he deported a record 3 million people. And Trump has gotten close to that number. I don't think he's at 3 million yet. But the only thing that has slowed Trump down from formally deporting people is that the immigration courts are overloaded and jammed up. So why did Obama do that? He deported all these people because he thought that by being tough on undocumented immigration, he would get the Republicans to cooperate with him to pass some immigration policy that would benefit people like dreamers, like young people who were brought to this country undocumented with their parents, who that we shouldn't penalize because of the crimes of their parents. So he thought that, and he was wrong. The second thing that Obama did that's very different from Trump is he didn't do this out of the goodness of his heart. He was pressured by dreamers. He was pressured by grassroots organizing. And the young people pressured him to instruct the immigration and customs enforcement. You need to set priorities with deportation. You need to concentrate your time and resources in looking for people who are violent criminals, drug dealers, rapists. Pick up those people and deport them. Nobody wants those people in American communities. But Obama told ICE, if you happen to come across somebody who the only law they broke is they're here without immigration documents, he said, leave them alone. And with the recognition that the average undocumented person in the United States has been here for 15 years. And they probably have deep ties to American communities. They have US citizen children. They have a spouse that's a green card holder. And these are called mixed status families. So Obama told ICE, why don't you set a priority and take out the most dangerous people first? Don't go after random people that are in the wrong place at the wrong time. Obama pioneered a program that people who applied for asylum, they got assigned to a social worker, and they had to check in with the social worker until the date of their actual case. And with that pilot program, over 90% of the people showed up for their immigration court date. The reason why I bring this up is because Trump has said that he has to incarcerate everyone or leave them in Mexico, because if you let them into the US, they'll disappear and they won't show up for their court date. Well, he wiped out Obama's pilot program when he took office. So he really doesn't care whether people show up for their court dates or not. He just doesn't want anyone even applying. So how has Trump been different from Obama? He's intentionally separated families. Trump has told his immigration and customs enforcement that there are no enforcement priorities. That if you happen to be, if you went to a house where you were trying to find a very violent criminal and the person wasn't home, but you found other family members who had not broken the law, arrest them. They're called collateral arrest. He doesn't care. Um, there's the Netflix series. There's a 6-part series right now called Immigration Nation. And you see ICE making collateral arrest of people who don't have their immigration papers in order at the wrong place at the wrong time. We may differ on this question, but I don't think arresting people and deporting them, people who are trying to make a living, I don't think that serves the national interest. And I don't think it makes American communities safer. And also, finally, Trump's policies on immigration, it's all restriction all of the time. And there's no talk of benefits when in fact immigration policy should be two-sided. It should be about benefits of, think about people applying for naturalization. Think about people who have married an immigrant and they're trying to bring their spouse to the United States. I mean, that's the benefit side of immigration and people becoming US citizens. That discussion is lost under Trump because he's only interested in restriction. So look, I've been very tough on Trump, and I'm not so thrilled with Obama either. And so what would the components of serious reform look like? On the one hand, there is broad agreement among Democrats and Republicans that the US immigration system is broken. And I agree with them. It is broken and it needs to be fixed. And what we disagree about is how to fix it. And the first thing I'd like to emphasize is that immigration policy cannot just be restrictionist. A good immigration policy has to be one that lets in the people that need to come in and keeps out the people who are not supposed to be here. Think of the multi-billion-dollar industry of tourism and how much money that brings to the United States. Think of BYU as an institution of higher education. Think about the numbers of foreign students that your university takes in, and not just the revenue stream provided to US institutions of foreign students. This is US soft power. This is what the international relations specialists say. The American Foreign Student Program is a way for the United States, without using guns and bombs, to influence other countries' opinions of us. Say someone from a foreign country came to BYU for their BA, and they spent 4 years with you, and they meet all kinds of Americans and they have American experiences, and they leave the country having a really good view and warm thoughts about America. That money cannot buy. And foreign students, I mean, we have to talk about the kinds of immigration that are necessary to this country. And Trump doesn't want to really talk about that. In his mind, immigration is only restrictionist, and it's unbalanced and it's untenable. Trump claims that he is concerned about undocumented immigration, but he, like Obama, like Clinton, like every other president before him, Democratic or Republican, they're not taking interior enforcement seriously. If I have had many people tell me I don't like undocumented immigrants because they don't respect US immigration law. Well, they're all here to work. And so for every undocumented immigrant who doesn't respect US immigration law, there is a US employer hiring them equally disrespectful of US immigration law. If you want undocumented immigration to stop, turn off the magnet. Fine the employers for immigration violations. Fine them in enough in a dollar amount that makes it hurt, that deters them. And put the employers up for criminal prosecution for hiring undocumented people. That has not happened, by the way, across Democratic and Republican administrations, because these businesses vote and they pay taxes. And so it's easier to go for the low-hanging fruit, which is to just do a big roundup of the undocumented people and not go after the employer. If you want to turn off the magnet of undocumented immigration, we also have to have a system of secure verification. So all of us have been through the I-9 process. When we apply for a new job, we have to verify that we're under immigration law, that we're eligible to work. The reason why the I-9 process has failed miserably is because there's a profusion of fraudulent documents. And so we have to have a procedure that verifies people quickly and accurately, that they're legally supposed to work in the United States, and we do not have that system right now. And Trump doesn't like all the Central Americans showing up at the southwestern border. Well, then he should take seriously foreign aid to those countries to help stabilize the countries, to send bilateral specialists, send American specialists to help these countries get a handle on their drug problem and their gang violence problem. If you stabilize the country, people won't leave. It's as a last resort that people pick up and leave their home countries. But if you don't take foreign aid seriously, you're not really addressing why people leave in the first place. And finally, I don't come to this conclusion lightly. I heard all the calls about abolish ICE, and I disagreed with it for a long time because I felt that it was going too far and that there needed to be an agency to enforce the borders. I no longer believe that. I think that we should dismantle the Department of Homeland Security. I think that entire government agency, not all the people that work there, but a lot of people that work there, the leadership in particular, they don't honor the rule of law. I think that agency needs to be taken apart and rebuilt from scratch. And finally, if you're concerned about security in this country, we've got to do gun reform. It has nothing to do with immigration, I know, but I teach an entire class this semester. I teach it every year, and it's called Guns, Money, and Politics. And we look at the political reasons why we don't have gun reform in the US. I mean, if you're really concerned about security and safety of going to the mall, sending your kid to school and not having a mass shooting, it has to be gun reform. It's less immigration, it's got to be gun reform. So I've talked long enough, and I hope that I've generated some questions, and I'm going to stop the share screen and let Brendan field some of the questions.
Great, thank you, Anna. We appreciate it. Again, I'm sure there'd be a loud applause right now in the room. You'd be taking your bows. Yeah, we have a few questions coming in. I think there's going to be some more. I'm trying to combine a few different questions as well.
Okay.
So first, are there specific portions of Trump or Obama administration's immigration policies that have already been challenged in court as unconstitutional, or do you see being challenged in court in the future as unconstitutional?
So the Muslim travel ban has already been challenged, and parts of it have been struck down. And they call it Trump travel ban 2.0 or 3.0 because the first two versions were struck down by federal courts. And so what Trump did was he threw in a couple of countries that were not Muslim countries. And then the Supreme Court said, well, okay, it's not a Muslim travel ban. I think it's ridiculous. I think the Supreme Court made the wrong call. But this is also an area of law where the Supreme Court is extremely deferential. The family separation has been invalidated, and a federal district court judge has ordered that process stopped. and has also given a timeline for when the children have to be reunited with their parents, which has not been met because DHS doesn't know where the parents are because they deported the parents and or cannot match up a child to parents or a family member.
Thank you. How do the policies and the protections and rights guaranteed under the U.S. Constitution apply to non-citizens, to non-Americans? And how does this then apply to these immigration debates?
It's tricky because it depends on which area of law that we are talking about. So I gave this talk in the context of immigration law, which is administrative law. And say, so I'm in New York City, and if you're a person picked up by NYPD, say as a suspect for a bank robbery, you're in a criminal proceeding, not in a administrative immigration proceeding. So if you're picked up and accused of bank robbery, you are granted the protection of, you will be read your Miranda rights, and you will be provided a lawyer at public expense. So what rights immigrants have, including undocumented immigrants, they have some, not all, the same rights as US citizens, but it depends, it varies greatly on what policy area that we're talking about. And so another example, First Amendment rights of free speech, pretty much guaranteed to US citizens, and not as guaranteed to immigrants who are not US citizens. So if you say something very political, it could put you in jeopardy of being banned from the country, whereas they can't ban US citizens from the country for speech. So it depends on the area of law.
Okay. You state that Trump's immigration policies do not address the push factors for immigration. And you mentioned 4 and 8 is one of those solutions. Are there other ways to address push factors from governments, specifically they ask about from corrupt governments?
I mean, this is a tricky one because some of these governments, like you said, I think the United States has to work jointly with international organizations to help governments get stronger, and not to work with governments who are corrupt. And it has to be international. It cannot be an America First approach. And I hate to tell everybody, but the United States has to really take climate change much more seriously. And the southwestern border, the people that are, the flood of immigrants that are there are mostly asylum seekers, but increasingly we're seeing climate change refugees. And these are people who are displaced from their countries by mudslides, by natural disasters. The country is just too poor to recover. And if you don't want people moving around and going into your country, you've got to take climate change seriously. And all of these things have to be negotiated in conjunction with other countries. This America First approach is simply of pulling up the drawbridge is not going to work. So,
a couple people have asked for some comparative comments with previous administrations. You already talked a little bit about the Obama administration, but specifically previous administrations which were somewhat anti-immigration in their outlook or enacted famous anti-immigration policies and laws. Like, how do some of these current developments compare to some of the other more notable ones from history?
These are, I mean, the difference between Trump is that most other presidents, they did it through in conjunction with Congress. And, you know, Ronald Reagan, the conservative icon, signed the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act, which is the last very major structural overhaul of the US immigration laws. And it took a dual approach. And basically the I-9 system that we have in place today, where people have to show these documents that they're eligible to work, and that if employers, that employers can theoretically be punished, although they are usually not. That was a Reagan creation in IRCA. But Reagan wasn't all punitive all of the time, because he paired that with amnesty of millions of immigrants. That the thought with the dual approach was, we're going to bring these people out of the shadow into the sunlight, and we're going to shut down the back door of illegal employment. But IRCA passed through Congress with his signature. It wasn't this sort of unilateral move with executive orders, and not so much with executive orders, but with all these technical rule changes that right now, quite frankly, I think Congress is overwhelmed with all the other stuff. And it's Stephen Miller, Trump's main immigration guy, is very good at using the administrative levers of the state to completely change immigration policy without congressional input. So I think, in comparison to other presidents, so the Migration Policy Institute has tracked over 400 technical rule changes in immigration. And if you don't like what Trump did, and let's say Biden gets into office with Harris, it will take him years and years to fix, because all the rule changes are interlocking, and you need to see how, if you change this one thing, how does this other thing change? I mean, I often think of the analogy that it's really easy. Any jackass can kick down a barn and burn it down, but it takes a skilled carpenter to build one up. And Trump has burned down the immigration system.
I think we have time maybe for one last. I know some students are logging off because they have classes to attend here at the next hour. But kind of a big picture one, for those who feel that the problem of immigration or problems in the immigration system are either too big or too political to solve, what would you suggest they do to try to make a difference?
I think, I know it's a cliche, but I think think local. And I think my expertise is national immigration policy. And I've been really busy every day, and not in a good way. When a US immigration scholar and constitutional scholar is constantly busy, it's kind of like an oncologist who's constantly busy. It's not good. And so there are many days where I feel like I can't do this. This is just unrelenting bad news. And so I try to focus on something local. I try to focus on donating money or time to a local organization, so I can see some sort of benefit to what I'm doing. And honestly, for me, since I'm a college professor, a lot of my students are immigrants. Most of them are documented, some of them are undocumented. And I feel like I can't change immigration policy, but I can educate people and give them the critical thinking tools and writing tools for them to perhaps make some changes down the road. So it's a good question, and it's not one that I'm sure I have a great answer for, except to try to act locally.
Well, thank you, Dr. Law, for joining us, even remotely. We wish we could have brought you here in person. And we're going to try to get this posted up online. I know there's a lot of people who were messaging earlier today, hoping that this was going to be recorded so they could view it. But thank you for sharing your expertise with us. And again, everyone virtually, let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much to BYU, and especially because Brendan has not even met me in person, so he had no idea. I could have been a terrible speaker, I still might be. But thank you for taking time out of your day for this.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Anna.
All right, see you later.